This is the town of Barrow-in-Furness. Since 1871, home to one of the most advanced shipbuilding yards in the world. In 1941, the shipyard was producing submarines for the Royal Navy, much as it is today. 1941 is also a time that we know today as the Barrow Blitz, a time when the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, decided to drop ordnance, bombs, on Barrow.
The Barrow Blitz was the most dramatic event ever to hit the town. Dozens of people died in the Barrow Blitz. Now, the exact number has never really been pinned down, ranging from 70 odd to 90 odd.
The damage that Barrow endured during what we now know as the Barrow Blitz is evident all around us. There is shrapnel damage on the streets, car parks, gardens, and new houses have been built to replace those buildings devastated during those raids from 1941.
All the places where bombs had fallen, and I mean obviously there were many places in Barrow, there were all these bomb sites to be cleared or left in the state that they were. But I mean, I remember Blake Street and Exmouth Street, of course they were flattened, cleared, eventually cleared. I can remember first of all going up there watching, say, soldiers with great hawsers round some of the taller bits, pulling them down because they were dangerous.
Here we are in Williehorn Gardens, created in a site devastated by the German bombing in 1941. This was once an area of shops, an extension of Duke Street, the main shopping street in Barrow. Around are buildings that have been created to replace the devastated buildings from that time. The vast majority of bombs dropped throughout the Second World War missed their intended targets, something that can be observed around Barrow. The intended main targets of the shipyards, steelworks and docks did receive hits, but nothing that disrupted production or the war effort. Instead, most of the bombs that fell on Barrow hit the houses, public buildings and churches of the town itself.
We come out and our house was all bombed, and we were lucky we had a house, but we couldn't live in it. Because up 10 doors up, they were bombed out and they were obliterated, and there were about 10 houses, and people were killed in Byron Street.
Barrow recorded air raids on the 14th and 16th of April 1941, and once again endured bombing between the 3rd and 10th of May. Of course, one of the things is that the Second World War didn't start overnight. Somebody didn't click their fingers on the 3rd of September 1939 and war started. There was a build-up to it. And one of the most significant aspects of the build-up for war for the people of Barrow was in 1936, and we have an illustration here. You can see, flying over the chimney pots of Vicarstown, the airship Hindenburg. Hindenburg, the largest flying object in the world in 1936, was on its way from Germany to New Jersey. And on its way, it took a route that took it over the centre of Barrow, very low over Barrow. People who did see it always comment that it's one of the most vivid memories that they still have to this day.
I was at infant school at the time, but obviously they'd been informed that the Hindenburg was going to come over Barrow, because we were all taken out into the playground to watch it. But I don't think we realised that it was probably there taking photographs of the shipyard.
I remember seeing it, I mean, and I can remember that for some reason, I remember that I was in Nelson Street and saw it come over. Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, very impressive. Yeah. But they do say, of course, that it was photographing the shipyard on its journey overhead.
So it flew over twice on its way out to New Jersey and on its way back to Germany. So this is showing that the Germans were preparing, if there was going to be a war, to have accurate targeting information for the Luftwaffe. Also, of course, the people of Barrow were expecting a war. So before the war started, there was an intensive programme of shelter building going on around Barrow. Public shelters, Anderson shelters being issued.
Well, it was underground shelter. You had to go down steps, and it was just like a corridor with wooden seats sat in it. Because I lived in the flats on Barrow Island in Steamer Street. We're in the bottom flat, so we used to go through the bedroom window and across the railway line and into the school playing field and down to the shelters. So it was quite a tidy run. We thought it was a quicker way than walking down the street and round, so we used to go through the bedroom window. But we were quite lucky on Barrow Island, we didn't have a lot of damage at all.
There was also the distribution of gas masks. It wasn't a surprise when the war actually started.
I couldn't imagine what a war would be like. I thought it sounded frightening, really. I mean, I've heard little bits of the First World War, but I knew this would be very different.
By the lead up to the Second World War, the Barrow shipyard was producing aircraft carriers, the Illustrious and the Indomitable. Illustrious, probably the most famous British aircraft carrier of the Second World War. Barrow was also producing the vast majority of submarines for the Royal Navy. Barrow built the first submarine from the shipyard in 1886. It built the first Royal Navy submarine in 1900, and by the 1930s was still the lead yard for most submarine production. During the Second World War, over 140 vessels were produced. Over 90 vessels were submarines. And these submarines were, of course, a huge threat to Germany, the country that wanted Barrow to stop producing these vessels. And the way to stop producing vessels? Simple. You send the Luftwaffe over, the German Air Force, and try and bomb the shipyard. What we have here is an intriguing map. This was discovered by somebody from Barrow in 1944. He was part of the forces that invaded France after D-Day, and at an abandoned airfield in northern France, in an office strewn with paperwork, he noticed a map of his hometown, of Barrow-in-Furness. He took it away and brought it back to Barrow, and eventually it came into the possession of the Dock Museum when he donated it to the museum. And what's intriguing about this map is that it is in German. This map shows the areas of Barrow to be hit by bombs in a prioritised manner. Perhaps not surprisingly, number one target, illustrated with the number one here, is the shipyard itself. So you can see it outlined around here. This is the primary target if you have some bombs left, although it does mention that the dry dock next to it is not to be bombed because it's of no importance, and that today is the location of the Dock Museum, so that was lucky for us. Number two, the dock system. Number three, the petroleum storage area. So this is a unique record of what the Germans were actually trying to drop their bombs on during the Second World War, and it also has areas not to bomb. Illustrated here are the hospital at North Lonsdale and the medical facilities for the shipyard. So these are intended as places not to drop bombs onto. Now what this does illustrate is that the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, was not coming to Barrow to destroy the housing. The housing is not prioritised at all. So it gives an insight into the targeting thinking of the Luftwaffe during the Second World War. Of course, the alert for the observation of any enemy raiders coming into the vicinity was the air raid siren. Sirens were often steam powered if they were in the shipyard or in a factory, but hand cranked ones would have to do if that was all that was available, and hand cranked sirens were issued to air raid precaution wardens around the country, and we have an example here of exactly that form of warning, the air raid siren. So it requires a bit of elbow grease, but hopefully you'll get the effect. Air raid sirens would regularly sound in Barrow whenever Luftwaffe aircraft were heading towards the northwest of England. But things became very real at 3 a.m. on the night of the 14th of April 1941, when German bombers came and dropped high explosive bombs on Barrow, the start of the Barrow Blitz. Mayoress Beryl Garrett remembers that night very well, and just where she was sheltering when the bombs rained down nearby.
We used to go underneath the library, the public library, because they had some big cellars there. And of course at the public library it's by St Mary's Church. So one night the siren went, we went there, and next minute there was this big explosion, and the Trevilian Hotel had been blown up where a few people were killed. But it sounded as if it was on the top of us. So we got, the priest came round to give us all the last rites, because they thought it'd come down on top of us, you know. So, as I say, and then we all got out and saw everything flattened, and we went home, but it was all right then, we were fine, so.
In those early hours of the 14th of April, bombs hit the steelworks, one of which failed to explode, and on Vernon Street and Napier Street, killing 14 people and completely destroying 6 houses. The Trevelyan Hotel on the corner of Dalkeith Street was completely destroyed, killing 5 people who had been staying in the hotel.
The familiar Commonwealth War Grave headstone for Harry Jenner, and he was staying at the Trevelyan Hotel on Dalkeith Street, corner of High Street in Dalkeith Street, when it was hit by a bomb on the night of the 14th of April 1941, and he and several others died. Unfortunately, he'd been attached to P-37, a new submarine being built in the shipyard. It later became HMS Unbending.
If you're ever walking along Abbey Road and have a look at the Nantate Centre, which was the technical college in 1941, you may notice that one of the features on the roof is missing. This was blown off in the early hours of April the 14th, when the Trevelyan Hotel was destroyed. The air raid siren went off again later in the day at 2:20 p.m, but no bombs were dropped. Air raid sirens also sounded around midday on Tuesday the 15th of April, but again, no bombers appeared. However, later that day, the air raid sirens went off once again at 9:57 p.m. The all clear wasn't sounded until 3:55 a.m. Once again, the Luftwaffe had struck Barrow. Ella Sharp remembers exactly what happened here in what is now Coronation Gardens on that night.
And then the Baptist Church was bombed, which is now the Coronation Gardens, and the minister, who was on fire watch duty, and the young chap that was with him were both killed at the Baptist Church.
Another landmine flattened houses in Union Street. Buildings in the near vicinity of explosions suffered blast and shrapnel damage. The Northwestern Daily Mail offices were damaged, but a newspaper was published with the assistance of the Barrow Guardian newspaper and their printing presses. Damage was also caused to the public baths on Abbey Road, the library and the Coliseum Theatre. Barrow wasn't the only town in the northwest to feel Hitler's wrath. Manchester and Liverpool were also heavily bombed around the same time as Barrow.
The flames of war heated the heart of Manchester. In one of the fiercest raids of the German blitzkrieg on Britain, a storm of bombs wreaked havoc in this proud city. But they leave it a prouder city still. Manchester will remember the horrors of that attack as long as the heart of the North continues to beat. But she will remember its glories too. The selfless service and dauntless courage with which her people met their hour of trial.
There was a brief respite in the bombings at the end of April, but once again bombs fell on the 3rd, 4th, 5th of May and the 8th, 9th and 10th of May. Over 40 deaths were recorded in Hill Road, Prospect Road, Hall Street, Newland Street and here in Byron Street. The first bombs to fall that week were on the 3rd of May on Hawcote Lane, soon followed by strikes on other roads such as Hill Road, and Exmouth Street.
When the actual Blitz was on, we had no shelter, so my father concocted a shelter in the lounge just by upending chairs and settees to make a sort of tunnel. Unfortunately, he forgot that with one end of the tunnel being near the fireplace, when the landmine dropped in Prospect Road, of course all the soot came down the chimney and all of us under this tunnel were absolutely black. I remember that very well.
Over 600 houses had to be eventually demolished, and another 1,400 houses were severely damaged by the bombings.
We lived in a place called Newland Street, which was really, really near to the yard. And the house was bombed. We managed for a while in a rented house in Keith Street, which I didn't like because the brewery was at the bottom of Keith Street and the smell was terrible when they were brewing.
The following night, bombs fell over a wide area, with perhaps Barrow Railway Station being the most notable place to take a hit. Copperknob, the furnace railway engine number 3, now on display at York Railway Museum, was outside in a display case and was badly damaged, as was the Great War Memorial at the station, where shrapnel damage can still be seen to this day.
The extent of damage for a town of Barrow's population was quite high. So Barrow didn't get off lightly at all.
Barrow received a respite for 2 days that week. But once again on the 7th of May, the drone of the Luftwaffe engines could be heard in the skies above Barrow as they dropped bombs that hit Wordsworth Street, Byron Street, Vernon Street and Hartington Street. Derek Lyons remembers exactly where he was that night.
I was aged 9 and we lived at the time over my father's chemist shop in Hartington Street until it was too badly damaged to live there. Then when the first bombs actually fell, there was such a scatter to get downstairs and we didn't aim for the shelter in Wordsworth Street. We went into the dispensary, which is on the ground floor, obviously behind the shop, and my mother and dad dived under a big solid bench that was in there, and I shot into the knee hole of my dad's desk that was also in the dispensary. If you look at that bench, which in fact is in my workshop at the bottom of the garden, you'll wonder how 2 people got under there. They got under there very, very quickly. And then, of course, when the bombs fell, you felt the whole house shake, all the soot came down the chimneys, because one of my abiding memories is the smell of soot and wet plaster sort of thing, but it came shooting down, and of course, being my father's shop, all the glass bottles fell off the shelves and the sort of intermingling scent of perfumes, ammonia and all sorts of other things. And then when we walked out, we were actually sort of wading through glass, which must have been heart-rending for my father. But, you know, to me it was all just very, very exciting.
The next night, landmines rained down on Ramsden Dock, Duke Street and large areas of Hindpool. Many of the explosives failed to go off, leading to the evacuation of many streets in Hindpool. However, the next morning, these explosives were rendered harmless and allowed people to go back to their homes. No fatalities were sustained that night, but heavy damage was.
One of the memories was when Crellin Street was hit very badly, was the whole house. We woke up, my mum had to wake my brother up, he slept through it, and we went down, and I remember opening the door at the bottom of my mum opened the door at the bottom of the stairs, and actually absolute clouds of soot came out and everything was covered in soot.
The next night was the last heavy night of bombing that Barrow would have to endure, but it proved once again to be a night of fatal casualties. 2 air raid shelters received direct hits, one in Newland Street and one in Hall Street. 14 people died and over 250 people were made homeless.
One of my brothers, Jim, would never get out of bed in spite of the siren. But one particular night he got up first and said to Dad and Charlie, my eldest brother, "Come on, we're getting out of here, and we're not going in that death trap, which was the shelter on the green opposite our front door. We'll go to the ones behind the Majestic, which was the hotel at the top of the street. There'll be more shelter there." And the bomb fell directly on the shelter. But there were no people from the street killed. There was an air raid warden. Now, you'll have heard about the air raid wardens. There was an air raid warden and 2 or 3 people who nobody knew. They were the ones who were killed in the shelter. So that was it. Nobody from the street got killed that night. So we were very, very fortunate. And my mother always said we've had our miracle.
The bombing had a major effect on the town, and the impact and seriousness of the Barrow Blitz should not be underestimated. Over 90 people died and over 10,000 houses were damaged or destroyed, and the evidence can still be seen all around us today. Next time you're walking around Barrow, take time to look around you. Those new buildings, those car parks, those gardens are all constant reminders of the devastation wrought on Barrow during the Barrow Blitz.
Did you ever have a friend you didn't talk to for years? Did you ever have a friend that you could walk on through 1,000 tears? Regret, we've had our share of them, but I'm still here for you, my friend. Hello.